And a very warm welcome. You're joining us here at Hyde Park on Other Derana 24. Tonight we will be talking about the existing tax regime, the existing tax structure and the future of taxation in Sri Lanka. Are we keeping with the expectations of development agencies, and are we considering real economic growth, equitable growth and fairness in terms of taxation when we talk about social justice? And are revenues in line with the expectations of the International Monetary Fund? Can we do more? To discuss all this, we've invited to our studios an expert in tax policy, tax law, and a practitioner of tax, delving into taxation in Sri Lanka. I've invited lawyer and accountant, tax expert and consultant, Mr. Suresh Perera, Principal Head of Tax and Regulatory at KPMG. A very warm welcome to you.
Thank you.
Good to have you here at Hyde Park. I think it's best to start off talking about how really Sri Lanka's tax structure is today. I know we've seen a number of developments over these years, especially after the economic crisis, when Sri Lanka was introduced to new taxes, especially personal income tax. Most of us were not paying taxes. But today, everyone, most of us are in the tax net. Is that right?
Okay, let me put it this way. Okay, when you say most of us are not paying taxes, I don't know how correct that statement is. But at the same time, there was, how do I say, the tax-free allowance at one point used to be 3 million a year. So nowadays it is 1.8 million a year. That 3 million a year tax-free threshold went down somewhere in 2019 with the big tax cuts that took place to 1.2 million a year. So from there it went up to 1.8 million a year. So that's why I think sometimes maybe we may have been in the tax-free threshold. Sometimes we may have, with the changing of the tax-free thresholds, some people went out of the tax network, so I think that may be the reason.
If we felt we were not paying taxes, that's because we were not in the threshold that we had not been in that slab that had to pay taxes at the time. You were in the tax-free threshold.
Correct. Let me put it this way. I think instead of the percentages, let me say, once upon a time, if our salary was, or our income was below 250,000, 2.5 lakhs a month, we were not in the tax net. And then it went to 100,000. If we were above 100,000, we were in the tax net. And now the threshold is 150,000 a month. So it's that category.
So how do we categorize these the kind of income earners here in Sri Lanka? I understand we talk about the rich, super rich, middle income earners, and those who actually don't fall under the threshold but somehow are paying indirect taxes.
Yeah, so good question. Actually, when you analyze the society in Sri Lanka, I think broadly we can put them into three baskets. One is the super rich. And then, so they are the people, I would say, who get their income by way of dividends, mostly, by way of interest, and maybe even capital gains. That way you buy and sell property and you make money. So that category normally is okay. Of course, there could be even the professionals, high earning professionals also in that super rich category. And then you have the middle income category. That is where basically your bulk of your income comes from, let's see, the salaries, monthly wages, and of course a little bit of interest, because that salary goes into a bank account, and that bank account will give you interest income, and maybe you have parked some money as in fixed deposit, so you have the interest income coming, and maybe you have even invested in the stock market, so you get a little bit of dividend income also. And of course, if you have bought an apartment, and you may get a little bit of rent income also. So that within that basket also you can have different categories, but broadly I will put them into the second basket in Sri Lanka. Then the other category where your income is solely from monthly salary. You spend that salary during the month, and you're waiting for your next month's salary to pay your expenses. Right. So that's the three categories that I would put. Of course, then there's another category who are below that also, who are not in the tax net. Not in the income tax net, but as you rightly pointed out, they are also paying taxes. Just because that they are below 150,000 a month does not mean that they are not paying taxes, because we do have a very, I would say, a tax collection methodology, tax imposition system in Sri Lanka, where you collect taxes by way of indirect taxes, by way of VAT. So without them knowing, they do pay taxes when they consume goods and services. When you buy food, you pay taxes. When you get services, different types of services, you end up paying taxes. So they also keep paying taxes. So that's
whether you're
basically
not in the threshold or not is not the question.
Yes.
It's that's just that we have a very high value-added tax component.
We have a tax rate of VAT rate of 18% in Sri Lanka. So though
is
you
it
are not
relatively
paying,
high compared to the region, or
correct,
at least
it's relatively high compared to the region. So when you look at say countries like Singapore, etc., Singapore, Australia, New Zealand, their rates are not that high.
And this is also these are also countries where disposable income is higher than that of Sri Lanka, I believe.
Yes. Actually, when you're speaking about disposable income, I think I should bring in here the recent recent survey report produced by the World Bank here. Now, they are actually pointing out with regard to this 18% high VAT rate, and they're also pointing out the repercussions of that. That, along with the subsidies being taken out, that is electricity, etc., you do the World Bank is pointing out 5% of the disposable income of the lowest earning category, that is the poorest of the poor category, their disposable income coming down by 5%.
So this is not the 150, below 150 threshold, but even below that.
Yes, basically the lowest,
paying,
yes, exactly. So their disposable income has come down because of the high 18% VAT rate and the subsidies being taken out.
So is there room for Sri Lanka to really bring down value-added tax rate, even when the World Bank has really focused on this slam, the fact that Sri Lanka's VAT rate is higher than the rest of the peers?
Yes. So again, interesting question. So is there room to bring down the VAT rate in the long run? Answer is yes, it should happen, but not immediately. I won't advise the government to reduce the VAT rate in the coming budget, because that can lead to another disaster like something that we faced in 2019. Because there are two things here. One is, if you bring down the VAT rate immediately, like what I said, basically that can have a severe impact with regard to the revenue collection to the government. That can lead to economic repercussions to the country. Other one is, when you bring down the VAT rate down, say from 18%, you bring it down to 12%. That does not guarantee that the consumers will enjoy that benefit, because normally in Sri Lanka what happens is, when you bring down the VAT rate, that goes to the benefit of the traders. What do traders do? This is called the profiteering. What the traders do is, they don't bring down that from 18 to 12, that 6% corresponding amount, they will not reduce the prices. So when they don't reduce the prices according to the percentage that the government is reducing,
the benefit is not passed down.
Yes, benefit is not going to the consumers, benefit goes to the traders. They make a secret profit.
You're a lawyer. I think we've spoken about this when we met previously too, about an anti-profiteering law.
Clause.
Is that a focus? Is that something governments have focused on, at least this government? And where else is this happening that we can learn from and implement?
Correct. So basically, when you look at the countries like, say, India, Canada, and all that, basically, they do have this concept called the anti-profiteering clause in their legal system, in their VAT acts. Now, in Sri Lanka, if you look at say around 10 times or more than 10 times, Sri Lankan VAT rate has been changed. So in a country where you observe frequent changes of the VAT rate, it's absolutely necessary to have an anti-profiteering clause included into the VAT Act. But I don't think the Sri Lankan policymakers have taken cognizance of this fact.
You mentioned about the tiers of income earners in Sri Lanka and how they're taxed. How much are we really paying in terms of taxes? Whether it's the those under the free threshold in terms of indirect taxes, those above 150,000 and the super rich that we're talking about?
Okay, if you're asking the numbers, well, I don't have the numbers.
Percentage-wise, if we look at?
That data also I won't have. Of course, the Inland Revenue Department should be having that data. But what we can see is during the last year, the tax collection has gone up. The tax, as I pointed out at the beginning, one of the focus areas among the tax policy makers have been during the last year is to strengthen the tax administration. So there have been many measures that have been implemented. For instance, some people criticize this, that is basically getting anyone over 18 years to obtain a TIN number, taxpayer identification number, as well as there was another very strong measure that was introduced to get the government institution, identified government institution to periodically provide bulk information to the Commissioner General Inland Revenue, including the banks. So because of that, there is now more transparency with regard to the income earnings by the people. So Department of Inland Revenue has the relevant information, I would say most of the relevant information for them to act. So because of that, you do find there is better compliance compared to, let's say, 3-4 years back, and that has resulted in Sri Lankan tax collection, income tax collection going up. So when I say this thing, okay, we do have the individuals, the corporates, as well as the cross-border transactions also. So what we hear right now is basically almost all the taxes: income tax, the value-added tax, the social security contribution levy, as well as the border taxes like the customs duty, the excise duty. All the taxes seems to be going towards. Basically, they have been meeting the targets. Some of the taxes have gone beyond the targets as well. So I mentioned, according to the structural benchmark of the IMF given to the government, by 2026 we should hit 14% tax to GDP ratio. So I think I'm positive that that target may be achieved.
So the government is doing well in terms of tax collection.
Okay, let me put it this way. When I say that, basically it is good to see the government collecting taxes, government on paths to meet the structural benchmark provided by the IMF, meeting the 14%. That should happen. But that does not mean everything is okay, because we have to see actually where are we collecting these taxes from. Are we collecting, is there tax evasion? Are there measures being taken to reduce it? Yes, as I mentioned earlier, there are certain measures that are being taken. And also, apart from that, is our tax policy correct? Are we collecting the taxes from the right segments of the society? Very important fact. Are we collecting taxes from the taxpayers who are already paying taxes, and are we going after them, and we are not going after the segments that are not paying taxes? Tax evasion is one. Other one is there imposition of taxes on certain areas? I'll take a little bit of time. Yes. Now, for instance, let's see something that I've been highlighting in recent days. That is, take the case of the cryptocurrency industry in Sri Lanka. There's a wide adoption of the cryptocurrency transactions, cryptocurrencies in Sri Lanka. Now, when you look at other countries, they do have express laws with regard to taxation of cryptocurrency. Now, cryptocurrency is not regulated in Sri Lanka. At the same time, it is not prohibited in Sri Lanka also. Same as India. Now, India, what have they done? They have taken a very progressive step with regard to taxing. Notwithstanding it being regulated or not being prohibited, they still impose taxes with regard to the cryptocurrency transactions. And that is something that we have to do in Sri Lanka also, because number one, that will bring revenue to the government from the cryptocurrency users, as well as that will act as a barrier that will provide the opportunity for the Inland Revenue Department to collect the requisite data to impose the other taxes also. That will go against, that will also ensure anti-money laundering policies are being implemented, etc. So I think that is one target the government should go after, impose express tax policies, tax rules with regard to the cryptocurrency trade in Sri Lanka.
You mentioned earlier that some of the important questions we must ask is whether we are taxing the right people and whether they're taxed enough. What does this mean? Are middle income payers paying more taxes than they should be? Or are they targeted more than they should be? Because a common grievance we hear is that professionals, income earners, those who depend on a salary, they feel that they keep complying in terms of payment of taxes or submitting their incomes and complying with tax policy. But that they feel like they're paying more than those corporates or the super rich that we're talking about. So where is this imbalance or inequality coming from?
Okay, I think you hit the right point with regard to the collection of the taxes. There are two things here, as you rightly pointed out. Nobody likes taxes. Nobody wants to pay taxes. But when it comes to, let's say, the employees working in the corporate sector where they are in the payee system, pay-as-you-earn system, or nowadays we call it advanced personal income tax system, APIT system, they have no choice. Before they get the salary into their hands, taxes are deducted at source by the employer and remitted to the Inland Revenue Department. So because of that, the accurate tax amount with regard to their earnings are being collected by the Inland Revenue Department, is being paid to the Inland Revenue Department. So is the case when it comes to the VAT also. VAT also, there is no option with regard to the consumer, and whether you are in the income tax paying category or not, you keep paying your taxes by way of the VAT, right? But when it comes to the other areas, whether the correct amount is being collected, whether there is a proper investigation, there's a question mark. So that is where basically Inland Revenue Department now trying to strengthen the tax administration. See, collection of the direct taxes actually is difficult compared to the indirect taxes. So that's why basically the government policymakers tend to prefer indirect taxes over the direct taxes. Easiest thing is to increase the VAT rate.
So is direct taxation difficult here because we don't have a digitized system? What is the challenge?
Okay, digitized system is one. It's basically how does the direct taxes work? Basically, the taxpayer has to declare and pay. If the taxpayer is not honest, if the taxpayer is not declaring on self-assessment basis and paying, then there's another stage for the department officers to go after the taxpayers. That means carry out investigations and collect. When it comes to indirect taxes, that's not the case.
Yeah, you pay by way of VAT or whatever goods you produce.
Yes, and actually, if you there's one school of thought that in a country like ours, indirect taxes is the easiest way to collect, but at the same time, you are hitting at the lower rung of the society when you are depending on the indirect taxes for the collection of the taxes. That's the pain that they feel. And of course, there's another aspect of it, that is the concept of the withholding taxes. Withholding taxes is also an easy way of collection of taxes to the government. And in Sri Lanka, I think the policymakers should specifically focus on withholding tax regime in Sri Lanka. One is basically, one bullet point is, okay, are there any other areas apart from the existing withholding tax transactions that they can introduce withholding taxes? One. The other one is the system working properly, withholding tax regimes? Because for withholding tax to function properly, there are certain other factors that should be there. For instance, when the taxes are withheld at source, the relevant credit must be given without much complications to the taxpayer. If the withholding tax credit is not being given to the taxpayer, the taxpayer will end up paying double taxation. So,
sorry, if you can explain that.
Correct. Now, a very common thing that I find, okay, when I go to the Tax Appeals Commission is the particular taxpayer has been subject to withholding taxes. Let's say banks have given interest deducting 10% withholding tax. Now, the taxpayer has the task of paying the balance to the Inland Revenue Department. So if there is interest, so when you get 1 lakh as interest, 10% will be deducted. So 10,000 will be sent by the bank to the Inland Revenue Department, and only 90,000 comes into the taxpayer's hand. But that is not a final tax. So therefore, the taxpayer, depending on his tax bracket, let's say he's in the 36% tax bracket, he will have to pay the difference between the 10% and his exact tax rate. So if he's in 36 bracket, he has to pay another 26% to the Inland Revenue Department and claim credit for the 10%. If that credit is not being given, he will have to pay that 10% again to the Inland Revenue Department, sometimes with the penalty. Because of the, malfunctioning systems at the Inland Revenue Department, I find that most of the taxpayers do not get that credit. So now then what happens is the taxpayers then lose the faith with regard to the system. So now these are finer points that the policymakers must look at and address.
But how can you effectively address that from a fairness perspective, really? Because it looks like you're being taxed and then you don't get your credit, and at the same time you might be paying a penalty. So the same guy who goes there to
correct. Now, this is what I'm saying. So this is the downside I see in the current withholding tax regime. Not with regard to all the transactions, with this basically happens to certain.
But what can we do? I mean, from a legal perspective as well.
Legal perspective, I would say basically a specific section should be introduced to the Inland Revenue Department. Production of the withholding tax certificate is good enough to get the credit. Right now, also to the same effect, there is a clause in the Inland Revenue Act, Section 89, subsection 2, but then that is being overlooked because it is not expressed enough by the Inland Revenue officers, and this matter is being litigated in the Tax Appeals Commission big time.
So as we move on to talk about from personal income tax to Sri Lanka itself, I think the president himself in Japan, President Dissanayake, mentioned that there are no plans to introduce new taxes to the country. But does this mean we are not going to have major tax governance regime here in Sri Lanka, so we will have a more convenient, eased out tax regime, or will there be reforms for existing ones?
Yes, so I think basically what the President said is that there will not be any new taxes being introduced, but that does not mean that there will not be any changes to the existing tax system. So my understanding is still there will be changes, reforms, as you said, to the existing tax system to make the tax collection more efficient, to collect more taxes. There will be, I think, because a government cannot survive without any taxes.
We spoke about VAT earlier, and VAT has been the center of attention even with the government back in 2019 when with the reduction of taxes there was a massive blow on revenues, and now we ask you whether there is room to really reduce value-added tax, and you clearly say no, but the World Bank itself says no, there is a major impact on disposable income. And then you mentioned again how about 5% of cost of living room or disposable incomes have really come down because of value-added tax. So how are we going to look at this in a more equitable manner? I think I'm stressing on this justice and equity because there are segments, as we spoke about, the super rich, the middle income, and those who don't. And it doesn't look like those who are paying taxes have a return as the general public from the government yet, although I believe people are looking and are really having hope for a better Sri Lanka.
Right. There are two things in the question that you raised. First one is taxpayers do not see a return with regard to the taxes that they are paying. That is with regard to whether the taxes that are being paid are being allocated, utilized properly. A different account. So that's the question. That is the area of accountability with regard to the taxes collected. So that's the one area. But the other point that you brought here is basically
this is about we spoke about reduction, and then middle income earners also
right,
paying.
Yes, correct. So when it comes to VAT theory, what we see is as a policy-wise, they say that don't give exemptions with regard to VAT. in Sri Lanka, we did witness, once upon a time, we had about 300 VAT exempt items, goods and services. But the VAT policymakers say that moment you create exemptions, that breaks the VAT, the value added chain, and that results in cascading. So from the policy perspective, providing exemptions with regard to any sorts of goods is not what is recommended. So what does the theoreticians point out? So what they say is basically when you want to give relief from the VAT to the vulnerable segment of the society, use a different techniques. That is like cash grants, subsidies, that kind of things. So cash grants is the main thing. Can
that really be implemented in Sri Lanka? Because we don't have good experiences in terms of the grants or even benefits going to those who are really in need, the vulnerable segments.
Correct, I understand. So that's why I said basically, okay, from a theory perspective, the theory is don't grant exemptions, but give cash grants, cash payouts to the vulnerable segment of the society to, how do I say, so that they will have the disposable income, so it will not be due to the high VAT rate, the amount that they pay, somehow basically they get by way of the cash grants. So question that you asked is, a scheme of that nature, is it practical to be implemented in Sri Lanka?
Sure.
We have seen, we are observing the amount, the degree of corruption that is taking place in Sri Lanka. Will a scheme of that nature, is there scope for a scheme of that nature to be implemented without being subject to corruption? Yeah, so that's something that we have to see.
So I think on that note, it's time we take a short break here at Hyde Park on Other Derana 24. We are in conversation with tax expert and consultant Mr. Suresh Perera, who is a lawyer and accountant, principal head of tax and regulatory at KPMG. We'll be right back to talk about the future of taxation in Sri Lanka. Welcome back. You're here at Hyde Park on Other Derana 24, and I'm in conversation with tax expert Mr. Suresh Perera, who's talking about the future of taxation in Sri Lanka. I wanted to ask you, before we go into more detail about taxation and tax policy, whether we are moving toward a more equitable, growth-driven tax regime, whether this is really targeting Sri Lanka's economic revival and growth sustainability, or are we just moving into ad hoc measures still?
Okay, it's a loaded question. So let me try to approach it this way. In order for us to have a systematic reforms, we must have the proper infrastructure for that. So I think I have been speaking a lot in relation to this. When I say proper infrastructure, what is that? We need to study the existing system. We need to understand the strengths of the existing system. We need to understand the weak points of the existing system. What is happening in the other countries? What are the lessons we can get from other countries with regard to reforming the tax system? And then we need to come with the correct tax policy. So that is a very difficult task. So for that, you need to have the proper infrastructure. That means basically you need to have a tax team sitting and planning these things, and that we don't have in Sri Lanka. At the finance ministry, we never had that system. We don't have a team sitting and planning. So when the budget time comes, people come with ad hoc proposals, and we do filter those ad hoc proposals and accommodate them in the budget proposals. That's that is a system that we have in Sri Lanka. So that is what we have been doing in the last 20 years. That is why we are in this situation.
Tax reform has been cyclical in Sri Lanka. I mean, almost reactive.
Exactly, reactive is the correct word to say. We are basically tinkering the system without basically having a proper plan, and then trying to implement that proper plan is what I see. So this is what has been happening during the last 20 years, right?
From a sustainability issue, because Sri Lanka has gone through deep economic pain. people have felt it, and we've had a struggle, we've had a crisis in Sri Lanka, the economy fell to rock bottom. So how do you suggest Sri Lanka move from that reactive tax system to a more sustainable, long-term, economic growth-driven system? What do you recommend Sri Lanka do? Starting off from the next upcoming budget for 2026.
I think I have repeatedly said this thing at these programs with you also several times. First thing is that we need to have the tax policy unit. This is not my idea. Basically, this is, so you can find in IMF literature also, Sri Lanka should have a proper tax policy unit to formulate the tax policies and oversee the implementation of the policies in Sri Lanka. So that's the key. All right.
Moving on from that, I think around the world we see governments, economies approaching AI, and AI being employed or deployed for efficient tax governance to even bring the public to tax regime, and from an equitable perspective as well, to ensure that there is justice across. So what can Sri Lanka do here? Because we are still behind in terms of digitizing also. But how do we go ahead with the rest of the world in bringing these important changes to the system?
Okay. I think what you are referring to is use of technology in relation to tax administration. So right now, okay, from I think 2023, every person, every individual should file their tax returns online. Nowadays we can't file tax returns manually. So that's one first step we have taken. But when we compare our situation with other countries, we do find that we are still far away with regard to the tax administration in relation to the other countries, most of the other countries. So you mentioned the word AI. So I believe what you meant there is basically IRD officers using technology to so analyze the tax trends, etc., so that they can come up with better tax collection, as well as to point out to the government with regard to the weak points and the strengths with regard to the tax collection process. So for that, okay, various tools to be used. So I think Sri Lankan Inland Revenue Department, or I would say even the Finance Ministry, still has not come to that stage. We are crawling when it comes to use of the technology.
But surely legal reforms can be brought to bring
yes,
about.
for instance, yes. Let me give you about one or two ideas basically. Okay, we do have something called a Tax Appeals Commission, and there's a separate Tax Appeals Commission Act also. I think that's the area immediately we can bring in the technology, meaning we have to amend we have to include certain amendments to the existing Tax Appeals Commission Act to permit hearing of the cases online, just like using Zoom or Teams or kind of a technique, where the taxpayers, where the Tax Appeals Commission members can hear the both parties, Inland Revenue officers as well as the appellant's case online, and get the submissions also, say written submissions, the petitions of appeal, etc., to come online. To do that thing, we need to amend the Tax Appeals Commission Act. When we look at the other statutes, okay, there is permission for that, but Tax Appeals Commission Act, those sections are not there. So that's a immediate change that they can do with regard to improving the efficiency of the tax appellate procedure.
And still we're talking about compliance and those declaring incomes, also paying taxes, but there is complaint that Sri Lanka's tax, maybe even compliance, is tedious to date, regardless of the advancements others have made. You practice as a consultant, an expert who helps many comply, but at the same time, how do you respond to this? How can we make it a little more less tedious, less cumbersome for especially even the senior citizens of the country?
Correct. Okay. Let me put it again this way. So from the point of the Inland Revenue Department, if you have seen the income tax return, yes, it's a very complicated document and as to how to fill the cages, even the professionals find it difficult without the aid of a tax consultant. Now, I think maybe taking that into consideration, as well as in order to simplify the process of filing tax returns, the Inland Revenue Department Inland Revenue Department has come up with this concept of simplified tax return. So if you have simple, you can say earning sources of earnings, basically say employment income, interest income, etc., basically subject to certain criteria, they can use that simplified form as opposed to the standard form. So that one positive step the Inland Revenue Department or the policymakers have taken to simplify the process of compliance. Okay, going forward, we expect there will be more that will be introduced. But having said, yes, I agree principally with you. Taxation is a very complicated area, tax principles as well as the tax compliance process. So when it comes to senior citizens, yes, moment you say senior citizen has to file the tax returns online, that's not something that they are comfortable with. So that is where I think the exceptions are being provided. So this is the process of evolution. So we can't expect everything to change overnight. But important thing is that policymakers as well as the IRD officers should keep taking incremental steps to hereby improve the system.
Has Sri Lanka thought about digital nomads, the digital services tax, and also bringing virtual currency into the tax net?
Okay, two different things, actually three different things with regard to the nomads being subject to tax. That's of course within the general tax framework. Within the provisions there's a liability, but then there's to be an implementation, different one. So when you talk about the digital services tax, again another complicated area, but Sri Lanka took one step in relation to this, but unfortunately it has been postponed till April. That is basically where non-resident service providers are providing services to Sri Lankan consumers and deriving income. For that transaction to be liable for VAT, there was a gazette regulation that was issued, and it was first challenged in the Supreme Court. Therefore, there was a 6 months delay in implementation. I think the planned date was 1st of October or September there, and then again the policymakers, I think because the systems are not in place, they postponed it to April. We hope from April that system will come into place in a better way compared to what I mean by better ways. The regulation that came, in my view, is not very complicated, or it does not address the need. We need to come up with better provisions with regard to that gazette, and I hope that system will work going forward from April.
A few things to discuss before we wrap up. We've been talking about investments, whether we give tax exemptions or whether we come up with our own tax policy where, while attracting investors, we also have that tax income coming into the country. Is Sri Lanka doing what we should be doing to ensure that Sri Lanka secures what we have to through these FDIs?
Okay, let me put it this way. I think one of the policies that the IMF has imposed on Sri Lankan government is there should not be tax exemptions introduced. So IMF has pointed out specifically with regard to the port city that there are, sweeping tax exemptions that we have been granting, and to put a full stop to that one. So as a result, we've seen during the last few months there was a change and new regulation has been introduced after the expiry of the regulation that was in place, reducing the tax incentives that were there in the previous regulation. For instance, there was a tax holiday for what are called business of strategic importance, secondary business of strategic importance. So that tax holiday, there was a 25-year tax holiday, income tax holiday. That tax holidays have been taken out in the new regulation. So there is only, 7.5% rate reduction for a period of 4 years that is being offered as an incentive. So there is no tax holiday with regard to the what I call the secondary business, secondary business strategic importance. And even with regard to the primary investors also, there has been a reduction with regard to the tax holidays that were available under the old Gazette. So in overall, what do we see? The government moving with regard to reducing the tax incentives and the tax exemptions. So here the underlying concept is, in order to attract foreign direct investments, the tool is not tax. The tool is not to offer tax holidays. The moment you offer tax holidays, there is this concept. We are, getting into a competition, giving up the taxes due to the government. So create other other environmental, so the other factors that the investors are looking at, get those things right, and that is what will attract foreign direct investment in the country, is the philosophy that I think we are going at.
And finally, Budget 2026, I know we discussed briefly, but what are really your suggestions here as we move forward? And SVAT is also something that we could not discuss. Repeal, retain or reform? What is your opinion there? In terms of Budget 2026, I would like if you can also address not just incomes, but exports and other SMEs as well.
Okay. So many points. Okay, let's see. Let me take one by one. So first I'll speak about the SVAT. Yes, now SVAT is something that was introduced in 2011 to address issue that the Sri Lankan VAT regime was faced with, that is to address the corruption and the delay in processing the refunds. For two reasons the SVAT was introduced. SVAT is a cashless system. Since it's a cashless system, that opportunities for frauds went down, right? And also cash flow relief was provided to the exporters because of the cash was not involved in that system. So now in 2025 we are taking out that system out on the basis it has not been. This is a unique system to Sri Lanka. No other country is using a system of that nature. So that seems to be the basis for taking it out. So the fear that is being expressed by the exporters and the other relevant stakeholders is that would the country go back to the pre-2011 stage? What is the pre-2011 stage? Will the corruption come in? Will the tax refunds be given without any delay? Because delay in providing tax refunds to the exporters, and exporters means their cash flow, they have cash flow problems, and that will weaken their situation, and that will impact our export trade also. When the export trade gets impacted, weakened, the foreign currency flow to the country will also get impacted. That can lead to the economy getting weakened also. So the question that you asked, what is my personal with regard to the SVAT system? Keep, grant or abolish.
Yes.
I'm totally against abolishing it, because I don't think it's a prudent view. And the excuse that has been given that for taking it out, that it is that's a unique system to Sri Lanka, it is not there in the other countries, it's a very weak excuse. If the SVAT system provided the solution for the problem, then it's a good system. Then we should have introduced that system to the other countries, because other countries are also having this problem. The refund build-up is something inherent to VAT system, unless the processing system, administration in that particular country is not great. So that is what we were facing, right? So what should have happened? SVAT system also had its weak points, not that it was a very super system. We should have addressed those weak points and retained it, is my personal view. But now, having said that, Yes,
Okay.
but now it has been abolished legally from 1st of October. So now my prayer is basically the government will provide all the resources that are needed to the Inland Revenue officers to ensure the refund system will work. We will not go back to the 2011 era, because that is going to have impact with regard to the Sri Lankan economy, and we don't want that scenario. So that's why I said now there's a gap between the government and the Inland Revenue Department also. The resources that are needed to the Inland Revenue Department to administer this complicated system should be given by the government. How do I say? The infrastructure that they need, the people that they meet, that means there should be enough number of people attending to this one, and overall monitoring should happen. Otherwise, this is going to become a big danger to the Sri Lankan economy. That's one. Then you talked about the
budget 2026.
Budget, okay. So correct, budget, on the 7th of November we do, the budget will happen. And right now the budget proposals, I believe, with the Finance Ministry are being discussed. So I hope they will come up with the correct policies. So from my personal point, I again reiterate this. There are two things I have been telling during the last so many years. One, what I mentioned earlier also, establish a proper tax policy unit. That is the root cause of the tax, how do I say, system in Sri Lanka not functioning properly. Second one is the tax ombudsman, the famous one I have been talking about. This is to address the grievances of the taxpayers with regard to the tax system, and that is a must in an environment like this. And then, of course, what else should I say? Okay, I would say basically interest on housing loan deductions. I will pick that one because housing need of the country, the people, is a essential one. And before 2011, there was a tax deduction for the interest on the housing loans. Inadvertently, that went out from the tax system because of the reforms that were introduced in 2011. I repeat again, it happened inadvertently, not that the government decided to take it out. And then in 2020, it was introduced among four other tax deductions, but then all 5 tax deductions were taken out. So because of that, today again there is no tax deduction for the housing loan interest. So shelter is a priority for the common people or everyone. So I think that is a must that should be introduced. If I look at it from the government's point of view, okay, what a proposal that will bring in a revenue to the government is the one that I have been talking about. Introduce tax regulations, tax clauses to collect the taxes from the cryptocurrency industry. There will be a good collection of taxes with regard to from the cryptocurrency industry if properly implemented.
Right, I think it's all the time we have here at Hyde Park. But thank you very much for taking your busy time to be here at Hyde Park to share with us your insights and your expertise on tax collection, tax policy, and the legal aspect of tax reform. Thank you once again.
Thank you for calling me.
Well, we had with us Suresh Perera, attorney at law, tax expert, tax consultant, and principal head of tax and regulatory at KPMG, joining us today to discuss Sri Lanka's future of taxation and the existing tax regime. We'll be back next week with yet another discussion here at Hyde Park. Enjoy the rest of the lineup of programs. Have a pleasant evening. Good night.